So clearly we've based our scheme on the Key Stage 2 programme of study. It might be a question that's asked, are you familiar with it, and does your scheme link to it? I was asked that last week in a deep dive for Key Stage 3, so it is worth being aware of it. And again, we have put that into the teachers' documents in our resources. So everything's very closely interlinked. It's very well mapped out. We have lesson plans that are obviously based on each lesson, and then we have an overview for each year scheme, which is across the week what we're covering, and then we have a kind of overview which Wendy's touched on. So there's plenty of documentation in there should you be using the scheme or be thinking about it, or if you're creating your own, just you can really sort of look at this webinar which is being recorded afterwards to maybe go back in and update yours. So it is very important that we follow the Key Stage 2 programme of study. So in terms of grammar sequencing, as Wendy's touched on, she showed you one of the pillars of grammar. What we really need to do, as Wendy's mentioned, the children need to see things many, many times over. So we scaffold the grammar, we model it, we do lots of guided practice with children, repeated exposure, loads of practice. We revisit the curriculum spirals so that they really start to internalise and learn and move that, say, chunk of information from the working memory to the long-term memory. And the more that they see things, they start to notice the patterns. So we don't bog them down with difficult grammatical explanations. What we do is expose them to various patterns, various grammatical chunks, etc. And then only when they get a little bit older do we start to unpick it and discuss some of the more complex parts. But we really do want them to be able to recognise and internalise and use independently those components. So if we just have a look here, we just thought we'd have a quick break now and over to you guys. So can you give an example of a definite article? This is just to help you sort of get into the mindset of grammar, just in case you're less familiar. But having said that, I'm quite impressed with the knowledge of many primary teachers, because you teach obviously a lot of grammar in English. So can anybody type in the chat box an example in French, Spanish, or in English, if you prefer, a definite article? When I've done primary training, this sometimes throws primary teachers. So we're not getting any. Wendy, you can put some in. Well, you can answer. Well done, Dion. Absolutely, yeah. So elle, la, elle and my brain's gone tonight. Elle and la for Spanish, le and la for French. So it is the word the, just in case you're not overly familiar with grammar. What about an indefinite article? So if the is definite, what would we put for indefinite? Again, you can put French, Spanish, or even English. Absolutely. So une, and un, una, un, and of course in English we'd say a or an if the next word began with a vowel. What about a noun? I ought to have this written on my mini whiteboard because I always get this one from primary teachers. Oh yes, you've done it, Carrie. Yeah, table. I should have had it ready. Everybody always responds with the word table, interestingly. Yeah, cat, dog, fruit, etc. What about a verb? So people often think of verbs as doing words, action words. So yes, to play, to do, to listen, etc. Amy's picked up one that many children, even at Key Stage 3 or 4, don't realise is a verb. The verb to have and the verb to be. Obviously, the verb to have is what we call a verb of possession, and the verb to be is the verb of being, the state of being. And often children, even at GCSE level, forget that to be and to have are actually verbs because they've been taught action words or action verbs. Subject pronoun, what about this one? This is less common, obviously, in Spanish, but we do use subject pronouns in English and in French. They do exist, of course, in Spanish, but we tend to only use them when we're wanting to emphasize who it is we're speaking about. So, yeah, the words I, indeed, well done, Kyrie, obviously a Spanish teacher. Yeah, él, he, yeah, elle, she, absolutely. So when we're teaching children verbs, what we do not do is introduce them to what we call the full paradigm. We do not introduce every verb part. Obviously, I is a very important one, so children can give personal information. So we tend to drip feed I, and then maybe you for the questions, then he and she, so they can talk about other people. And then the we and the you, plural, and the they come up much later on in years 5 and 6. So it's a gradual drip feeding of verb parts. And conjunctions, as you call them, we call them connectives at secondary school level. If you can give me some examples of conjunctions. Don't worry if you're not overly familiar with these terms. And I should have really emphasised this scheme. One of the reasons Wendy and I actually sat down and wrote this scheme was in 2014, when languages became statutory. Certainly in the school I was based in, the funding for peripatetics went, and a lot of the classroom teachers had to take over French and Spanish teaching. So one of our key aims when Wendy and I sat and started to develop this scheme was to create it for users of all linguistic levels. And we have many teachers using this that didn't know a word of French or Spanish, or had a very rusty, sort of very reduced bank of vocabulary from their GCSE or even O-level days. So it is designed for people who are non-specialists. So thanks for those conjunctions, and, but, also, etc. An adverb, any thoughts on adverbs? This is something we bring in later on in the scheme, just so that children can lengthen their answers and add a little bit of extra meaning. Anybody any idea in English or French or Spanish? Oh, interesting one, lentamente. We had that one on Monday. We had quite a big group on Monday. Yeah, so words like quickly, slowly. Obviously, a lot of adverbs in English end with ly, but we've got words like well and good. So they're not all ending in ly. So really, very, etc. So they could be adverbs of intensity. And then prepositions, these come up, I think it is in year 4 and 5 in our scheme. Anybody got any thoughts on prepositions? We tend to bring this in when we're teaching school items and where they're located. So it tends to be things like on, under, as we can see here, behind, next to, etc. So thank you for those. And finally, comparatives. Anybody got any thoughts on comparatives? So this is great when children are wanting to give opinions on things and compare and contrast. Absolutely. More than, less than. So plus que, moins que, menos que, más que, indeed. So don't worry if you're not overly familiar with these, because our scheme takes children really slowly through these grammatical components, and the resources are designed with very clear explanations and also lots of audio in the PowerPoint. So nothing needs to be led by the teacher. If they're not overly confident, they can learn alongside the children. So what we've put in the book in the grammar section is a real breakdown, a really detailed breakdown of what happens in each year scheme in French and Spanish. So here would be kind of a table, a summary of the main components, such as articles, nouns, etc. And then we give always English examples, and then French, and then Spanish, so that less confident speakers of the language can have a look and check their understanding of those grammatical functions. And then what we do is, obviously, our scheme is really to give children lots of practice and exposure, is we contextualize the grammar. So often what we've done is we've thought, what do we want to teach? What would be the logical next step? And then what theme or topic can we weave in to help the children access that grammar and practice it? And then how can we keep their level of engagement and interest up? So you can see there, we use a wide range of activities, songs, raps, stories, we've got poetry in there, we've got animated clips and real clips of children, and then we've got a supporting app. So everything grammar-wise as well as vocab is practiced in a very wide variety of ways. Also in the book is an example of what children can do in English as well as French and Spanish at the end of each year scheme. So what you can see on screen would not necessarily be tested in one assessment. It could be, but not necessarily. But that gives you an indication. So you can see here, end of year 3, greetings, a question, giving one's name and age, describing items with colour, linking with conjunctions, but, and, etc., giving opinions, referring to days of the week, and then signing off with a farewell. So that's what we would be expecting children at the end of year 3 to do. So what we've done is we've given the kind of examples in the table as a paragraph, then we've broken it down into the key knowledge and skills, as you can see there, and then we've talked about the particular grammar that will be needed to be able to produce either in written form or orally that kind of information. So a real clear breakdown. If you're teaching with our scheme, it might be worth looking and referencing the grammar chapter as you're going through the year scheme. That on the screen there then just gives you an example. So in year 3, you can see we start off with nouns and gender. You can see an activity there with several animals. Then they move to short sentences. Then they start to lengthen the sentences with conjunctions. Then we do some fluency memorization activities using talk for writing. Then they start to bring in colours, so they're adding adjectives and they're learning about the order. And if you are a French or Spanish speaker, you've got some basic knowledge, you'll know the word order is very different in French and Spanish compared to English. And then the final example shows how we bring I would like, which is a conditional phrase. So that's just a kind of a pictorial overview of the journey of some of the key kind of grammatical components for year 3.